Hello everyone, it's Monday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Over the weekend in the city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia hosted talks aiming at finding a peaceful settlement to the war in Ukraine. Though some European sources say there had been agreement on some key points, the conference could not come up with any final declaration. However, what is noteworthy is that the talks showed Saudi Arabia's growing prominence in international affairs by drawing around 40 countries, including members of the BRICS bloc, besides Russia, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. What significance did this meeting have, and what is the latest on the Ukrainian war? To discuss this, we invite Professor Ban Kil-joo at the Ilmin International Relations Institute of Korea University. Professor Ban, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Good evening. And we also have Professor John Blaxland from the Australian National University. Professor Blaxland, thank you for your time.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on the program.
Thank you. Now, Professor Ban, first question to you. The weekend's meeting of national security advisors and other senior officials from around 40 countries, but not Russia, aimed to reach an agreement on how to end the conflict in Ukraine. Now, before we delve deeper into the details, what was the significance of this meeting?
Well, unfortunately, it has been almost 1.5 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. So how to end military fight needs to be carefully taken into consideration. Actually, it was already late. Anyhow, I would like to point out the significance of this meeting in 4 ways. First of all, this meeting is significant in the sense that the methodology of military fight termination was dealt with in a serious way by external players. External actors' role in initiating how to end this fight are pivotal in a situation where direct players in this war, Russia and Ukraine, make it hard to get things started. So I would say that there are 2 ways of ending military fights. One is to make fights temporarily stop, which is an armistice. It is a way similar to the case of Korea, which was made under the Korean Armistice Agreement in 1953. The other is to end the war permanently, simply beyond an armistice. Anyhow, I believe discussing itself was important. Second, this meeting filled the gap created by the non-function of UN Security Council. Collective security come to a halt because, ironically, an invader was a permanent member of UN Security Council, which is Russia. So another international entity needed to fill this gap. I think this meeting did those roles in some ways. Since the international organizations remain little function under the new Cold War, substituting entities like this one are more likely to emerge as time goes by. Third, it might serve as an opportunity for mitigating the new Cold War dynamics in the sense that the 2 great powers under the new Cold War, the United States and China, all together joined in this meeting. I do think this meeting is helpful for encouraging the discourse of de-risking, not the discourse of decoupling. Finally, this meeting showed how an aggressor is excluded from international meetings by ruling out Russia. This exclusion can be defined as diplomatic punishment or diplomatic sanction, which has continued to go on since last year. This signal can contribute to preserving rules-based international order by punishing a revisionist. So all in all, I would say that this meeting turned out to be substantial in some way, as well as symbolic.
Right, I see. So the peace summit was indeed significant in many ways. Now, Professor Blaxland, Ukraine's aim for the meeting was to build a bigger coalition of diplomatic support beyond just Western allies, but reaching out to other countries as well. And specifically, the Ukrainian president said he was hoping for more support for his own peace formula. Now, what is his peace formula about?
So, thank you. Yes, Zelensky's peace formula has been articulated since 2022. It's a 10-point peace plan. It involves nuclear security, ecological security, food security, a range of other securities. And of course, what it does also, it demands the withdrawal of Russian forces, some kind of mechanism to ensure that there is accountability for past injustice and a peace agreement. And that is just intolerable to Vladimir Putin. So his peace plan is a tall order for the Russians. It's, from the Western point of view, completely reasonable, but not likely to be successful. And that's why conferences like this one at Jeddah are so important, because it gives Vladimir Zelensky a platform to engage with other erstwhile security partners and economic partners of Russia, to try and persuade them to actually wean them off their reliance on Russia, and get them more and more on side, because we've had a real challenge where the global south, what we used to call the third world, has been unsurprisingly sympathetic to the Russian view. That seems to be changing, in part because of Russia's accelerated and increased engagement on blocking food supply, which is, of course, very, very disconcerting and unnerving for many people in Africa who've been reliant on trade supplies coming from Ukraine.
Right, I see. Now, that being said, Professor Ban, do you believe the peace summit was successful enough for Ukraine to receive more support for Zelensky's peace formula? I mean, what was the position of countries, especially from the BRICS, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa?
To be honest, it is true that Ukraine needs more support from more countries than the ones which attended this meeting if Zelensky's peace formula is going to be successful. In this meeting, however, contributed to moving forward on that journey. The greatest outcome is that they agreed to launch a working group and discuss agendas of peace formula suggested by President Zelensky. Furthermore, this meeting turned out to increase the possibility to hold the Ukraine Peace Summit around the end of this year. This meeting is meaningful from a viewpoint of international politics as well. As noted earlier, China joined this meeting, although it was far from its significant change of attitude towards the Russia and Ukraine war. At least China showed its willingness to address this puzzle rather than simply strengthening solidarity with Russia. States which belong to the global south, such as India, Brazil, and South American countries, had kept their position to be on the side of neither Russia nor Ukraine. That explains why President Zelensky attended the G7 meeting in Hiroshima to ask for more help to more countries in a situation where India and Indonesia, as well as G7 countries, joined the summit. So what matters is that China defines itself as a member of the global south, although it is ranked second in economic power and second or third in military power. This definition is made partly because it helps China be more cooperative with the global south in its effort to seize the initiative of the new corridor mechanism. Since China is recognized as a leading country in the global south, in this sense, its attendance could help more support from the global south. Similarly, China's attendance might have a positive impact on India's decision to join this meeting. But at the same time, its attendance does not mean that its no relations with Russia are going to be changed anytime soon, because China intended to increase its international leverage and maximize its international national interests by joining this meeting.
Right, I see. Though we would have to wait and see. The fact that the meeting have opened up a possibility of doing the peaceful settlement by more than 40 countries, including China, does seem really significant. Now, Professor Blaxland, another noteworthy part is that talks over this peaceful settlement were held in Saudi Arabia's ancient Red Sea port city of Jeddah, with the king-in-waiting, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, hosting the event. What is behind these efforts by MBS to discuss peace?
Great question. So there's, mixed motives here for MBS. Mohammed bin Salman, he's the leader of Saudi Arabia effectively. He's in a very powerful position. He, of course, is, when President Biden was in the running for election, he was previously quite critical of MBS, it's very interesting to see Saudi Arabia try and make the Americans squirm over the power that Saudi Arabia seems to have gathered. Clearly, oil is a factor. They want stable oil prices. But Saudi Arabia is playing a linchpin role in facilitating negotiations and engaging with China, with Iran, with Russia, with the global south. This is the kind of pulling power that used to be the remit of the United States pretty much on its own. That is no longer the case, and this has got to be galling for the United States. So I suspect on one level, this is something the Russians are happy to see take place because it takes away from credit to the United States. But on another level, the Saudi Arabians, they're not exactly friends with Russia. Their relationship is all very much calculated and all about what's in the interests of Saudi Arabia and MBS in particular. So when we think about what's at play here, this is giving Saudi Arabia considerable additional leverage on the world stage in negotiations with the United States over arms, with Israel over its relationship in the region, with the Gulf states in terms of its priority agenda items and getting the Gulf states to be more, under the direction, if you like, indirectly and informally from Saudi Arabia, and also sending a message to, its erstwhile, enemy, the Iranians. So there's a lot of dimensions here, a lot of dynamics at play that are more than just about the war in Ukraine when it comes to what's in it for Saudi Arabia, that's for sure.
Right, I see. Saudi Arabia playing a linchpin role. Now, Professor Ban, I'd like to ask you as well. So how do you see the view that Saudi Arabia is being at the confluence of competing global interests?
Tricky but important questions. So I believe MBS attempts to have an increased leverage, to say the least. I think MBS wanted to show its presence in international politics to domestic audiences as well as international audiences to be more recognized as an influential leader. That explains why Saudi Arabia suggested and hosted this meeting. Meanwhile, international society, the United States, and even China had no excuse to oppose this meeting because China is not a direct player in this war, and it is a powerful actor in the Arab League. These days, MBS is eager to make Saudi enhance diplomatic autonomy and be a major player around the world. MBS seems to think that his strategy is working so far by making high-ranking officials of the United States, such as Secretary of State Blinken, even President Biden, stop by Saudi Arabia and meet him. I think his plan seems to work because he takes advantage of the new Cold War, which means the U.S. China are highly competitive. MBS seems to show that he can play a meaningful role in international challenges like the Russia-Ukraine war. Earlier, last fall, he was eager to play a role in releasing Western mercenaries captured by Russian armies in the Ukraine battlefield. If this role was tactical back then, hosting this event now is more strategy, in the sense that around 40 states gathered in Saudi Arabia to make the peace formula be established in a unified way. In short, Saudi's role seems to enhance its strategic leverage in international politics.
Right, I see. So Saudi Arabia is definitely trying to boost its diplomatic autonomy. Now, Professor Ban, meanwhile, Ukraine started consultations with the U.S. over providing security guarantees for the country pending the completion of the process of joining NATO. Now, how is that expected to develop?
Well, I think it is expected to strengthen Ukraine's military capabilities and increase credibility for support of international society. As you are well aware, at the NATO summit in Lithuania, the United States laid out the key principle of Ukraine's membership to NATO, which is condition-based. What is it? Is a membership will neither automatic nor fast, which means the procedure will be taken with a degree of Ukraine's preparedness. The condition-based principle was intended to stop NATO countries from being divided and Russia from making an excuse to invade countries beyond Ukraine. But at the same time, the United States did not want to make Russia misperceive its approach as a signal of abandoning Ukraine or reducing its support. So the United States is willing to provide security guarantees for Kyiv, pending the completion of the process for Ukraine to be an official member of NATO. Actually, the Group of Seven, simply beyond the United States, pledged these guarantees at the NATO summit. This consultation has started to make this plan done in reality. Although how to do that remains to be seen, it seems to focus more on enhancing Ukraine's capabilities to defeat and restrain Russian provocations and aggressions. In line with this, the Western group pledged to provide more weapons at the NATO summit. One thing seems for sure, this consultation is most likely to bolster Ukraine's military capabilities. Furthermore, this approach could help Ukraine continue to conduct the counteroffensive.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Blaxland, moving on to the recent drone attacks. Now, we have seen Ukrainian sea drones attack 2 Russian ships in the Black Sea recently, one striking a Russian naval ship, another striking country's biggest oil tankers. Now, many say through these attacks, Ukraine is opening up a new frontier by unleashing such powerful maritime drones. How do you see this view?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting turn of events because for a long time we've been distracted by the apparent World War I-like tactics along Donetsk and on the battle around Bakhmut and the attempts for the Ukrainian forces to break through to Melitopol and down to the Sea of Azov to cut off the Russian forces in Crimea. And I think that still broadly is the case. But what we're also seeing is multifaceted engagement. The Ukrainians are using everything at their disposal. They've been developing their own homegrown drone systems. They've accessed great American and British and other European and allied technology. And they are being innovative with the drones striking the ships in harbour, with the air drones striking bridges, blocking off key passages of communications or lines of communication, supply lines through from Russia via the Kerch Bridge and other supporting bridges that are necessary to get supplies, food, logistics, fuel, ammunition to the front lines to sustain the Russian forces. So the Ukrainians have been playing a multifaceted game via sea, unsettling the Crimean Russians, by air, blocking the lines of communication, the logistic resupply lines, and on the front line probing as well. This is all with a view to undermine Russian resolve, weaken their logistic support, make it more difficult for them to sustain operations in, I think, the hope that eventually, along the way, with this multiple pronged attacks from air, from sea, from land, in the cyberspace and in the information space, as we saw in the summit in Jeddah, undermine Russian resolve, weaken their ability to hold the line in southern Ukraine and around Crimea, and give the Ukrainians the ability to break through this very, very tough, multi-layered defensive line and enable them, once they've done that, to get through quickly, premised on the understanding that the logistic support for the Russians is weakened, the morale is broken, and the line of defense is breached. All of those combined are the expectation that while things haven't happened as rapidly as some might have hoped, we might yet see in the weeks and months ahead a crumbling of Russian ability to hold the line that enables the Ukrainians to break through and get through to the coast, to the Sea of Azov, and in so doing cut the lines of communication, cut the supply lines, break morale, and hopefully give them, by the end of the summer fighting season, a stranglehold over the Russian positions in the south and significantly weaken them in the east to the point where they get a strong enough position to win the information battle with the rest of the West in other words, getting the West to continue resupply coming with the global South, so that they'll feel that the Ukrainians are the underdogs, that they should be supporting, and that the Russians are the bully boys who are breaking up the global food supply chain. And, of course, having the effect on Russian domestic political resolve as well. Multifaceted on the ground, multifaceted information domain. And, of course, the key one is the 15 centimetres between the ears of Vladimir Putin. That's where they're trying to shape things as well.
All right, I see. Very interesting. Ukraine playing multifaceted game right now. All right, now, Professor Ban, I'd like to also tap on this, the reason behind such Ukraine's escalated maritime drone operations. It seems that it has escalated since Russia pulled out of the, Black Sea Grain Initiative last month. Now, how are global food prices being affected by Russia pulling out of the deal? And what kind of other issues is this causing?
Well, it is a real sad story from a viewpoint of human and human evolution. As Russia has deadlocked on the battlefield, it started again using food as weapons by terminating the grain deal. This is the reality. This contamination has already been a negative impact on food security in the sense that food prices went up last month around the world. As you know, 400 million people are reliant on grain from Ukraine. So global food security could be at stake, particularly in the areas of Africa and the Middle East. To top it up, if global food prices go up, it will encourage other inflation as well. What matters is that this termination is more likely to affect people in developing countries than the ones of developed countries. So the global north needs to put more emphasis on helping people from the global south in order to enhance its food security. Without addressing this gap between the global north and the global south, international cohesion to make this war terminated is likely to be weaker. Food weaponization is a lousy example in international politics because export has been made fully throughout history, even at war. In this aspect, as of right now, international politics is under the mechanism of complex security, which means all type of security is interconnected, ranging from food security to even to nuclear security. Anyhow, finding another way of exporting Ukraine's the grain is most likely to get significant in order to neutralize Russia's intentions of food weaponization.
Right, I see. Now, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask this last question to our Professor Blaxland. Professor, Russia's killing of the Ukraine grain deal is apparently having a boomerang effect on Russia, as African leaders could not be wooed despite Russia's efforts to extend its influence across the global south, as shown through the second Russia-Africa summit. Now, how do you believe these issues to develop further?
So the attack on the port facilities at Odessa and the grain silos there, and on the banks of the Danube River, these are being broadcast globally. This is sending a message to the world that Russia really doesn't give a damn about the food situation globally, and that its priority is itself, and most particularly the ambitions of Vladimir Putin. And so what I think is happening is that while there's been a kind of strong reaction in the global south against the United States over the years and against the West, and the Russians, particularly thanks to the work of the Wagner Group and other militia groups, and Russia's attempt to co-opt and invest in African countries where there are critical minerals and resources, they have been able to persuade several of these African states and others in the global south that Russia is really the underdog. But that narrative has really worn down. So what's happened in Odessa and on the Danube with the grain silos is really having a toxic effect in terms of the goodwill that remains for Russia.
Right, I see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition, but thank you, Professor Ban and Professor Blaxland, for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.